Hello again. Now, I got an email the other day from somebody asking me what scales should I be learning. That's kind of a difficult question to answer because there's no real definitive answer. There's a lot of it, the answer is, well, it depends. It depends on what kind of music you're going to be playing, what styles of music you're going to be playing, because certain scales will lend themselves to certain styles more than others. That said, I think there's a core set of scales which every musician should know. Now, if you've got a copy of PhatPhish there and you look at it, there's an awful lot of scales in there. The last count, I think there's something like 50, possibly more different scales in there, from the really fundamental through things like the modes and then going on to the more exotic and outlandish scales. You don't need to know all of those. Like I say, I think what you should have in your vocabulary is a subset of all of those. You know, a core set of scales which every musician should know, and then complement and supplement that with scales which are most appropriate to the styles of music that you play. Now, the first of those core scales which I think every musician should know is the major scale. Thinking on it, I think the first video tutorial I ever did on YouTube, it's probably showing its age a little bit now, but the first video tutorial I did was about the major scale. It's a very fundamental scale in music. It's like the frame of reference for everything else that we do. So any other scale or whatever that we talk about, it's usually written or referred to relative to the major scale. So even if it's not a scale you're going to be playing a lot, so if you're playing music like heavy metal or something, you're not going to be playing a whole lot of major key material. Probably sounds a bit too happy for hard rock and heavy metal, but it's still worth knowing because it'll help you to understand and interpret the scales that you do learn. Now, another scale, actually two scales which I think you ought to know, are the minor pentatonic, and it's very close relative to the minor pentatonic flat 5, also known as the minor blues scale. Now, these are scales that you probably use a lot more in like rock, blues, jazz, all sorts of different styles use the minor pentatonic. So it's a good scale to know. Again, it's another one that I tend to teach very, very early on. Sometimes, depending on the student, it could be the first scale that I actually teach somebody, but because of its practical value. So one other scale that I'll add to those three to give you like that core set, which I think just everybody should know, and that's the natural minor. Now, the natural minor, you could say, accounts for pretty much half of the music that you play, because music will either be in a major key or a minor key. It's not quite like that, but it's a huge proportion of music is written in a minor key, and a lot of like rock styles, particularly when you get it like the metal side of things, will be using a minor key. So the natural minor is a very important one to know. So there's your four scales which I would consider to be the absolute must-knows: the major, the natural minor, the minor pentatonic, and the minor pentatonic flat 5, or the minor blues scale. And when I'm talking about getting to know those scales, it's not just about being able to play one scale box through on the guitar. It's about knowing the formula of the scale, knowing the way that the notes in the scale relate to each other, and being able to find different shapes for it and different fingerings for the scale on the neck. There's not just going to be just one scale box that you can use. The same note can occur in multiple places on the guitar neck. So, using a tool like PhatPhish to help you look at the fingerboard map and work out where the notes of the scale appear, you can come up with different fingerings and get proficient at being able to play that scale from any starting point at different positions on the neck, and have an understanding of how it sounds and how the notes in it relate to each other. And with things like the major scale and the minor scale, as well as just knowing the scale itself, it's really, really useful to understand how those scales harmonise out into triads and seventh chords and so on, because that helps you to understand the harmony of the scale and how the scale can be applied. And moving on, what other scales are there that you need to know? Well, this is where kind of depending on the style of music that you want to play, your choice of scales that you're going to use to extend your vocabulary will vary. If you're going to be playing predominantly blues, then you're probably going to be looking at variations on the minor pentatonic, looking at other blues scales and so on. If you're going to be playing say like heavy metal or a lot of rock styles, you might want to look at the modes. Modes of the major scale, modes of the natural minor scale. Modes are really useful if you want to get into jazz. Now, another couple of scales that you might want to consider are the other two minor scales, the harmonic minor and melodic minor. Harmonic minor that's got quite a neoclassical Gothic sort of sound, as you can hear. You know, if you listen to guys like Yngwie Malmsteen, you know, that neoclassical metal sort of style, that harmonic minor gets used quite a lot. And again, you can take that harmonic minor and break it down into triads and chords and understand the modes that occur on each degree. So that gives you another little family of scales to learn and to get to grips with and to understand. And the other minor scale that you might want to look at is the melodic minor. The melodic minor is something that occurs quite a lot, gets used quite heavily in jazz styles. Again, you know, learn the scale, understand the harmonies, the triads and the chords and so on, and the modes of it. And you can also, as well as thinking about the way that chords and so on are derived from scales, you can kind of flip it on its head a little bit, because if you're presented with a chord, it's useful to know, well, how could that chord be constructed? You know, so by understanding the formula of the chord, how it relates back to certain scales, you could come across a chord in a progression and say, all right, for that chord, I could use such and such a mode, or I could use the harmonic minor over that chord, or I could use the melodic minor over that chord, because of the notes that contained within the chord also occur in the harmonic minor and the melodic minor, even if the piece generally isn't written in the harmonic or the melodic minor. This is something you just kind of get familiar with as you look more into music theory and study the harmony and so on of the scales. Moving on beyond the major, the minors, you know, I mentioned the minor pentatonic before. If you're learning the modes, then it's useful to know both the major and the minor pentatonic and the way that they act as skeletons for those modes. And moving on from that, there's a whole raft of other scales that you might want to experiment with. You know, if you use PhatPhish, you can get PhatPhish to play the scales through for you, so you can hear how they sound. And you might find one that, oh, you like the sound of that. You know, get familiar with, you know, playing it and get familiar with the way that it sounds. That's something you can experiment with and use it in your own playing. I mean, there are some pretty weird and obscure scales in there. You know, a good example is the enigmatic mode. That's a really obscure scale. You won't hear that in music very, very often. In fact, I'm going to think of like a couple of examples that I know that use the enigmatic mode. One of which is The Enigmatic by Joe Satriani off his Not of This Earth CD. And if you hear that song, it sounds really, really weird, because it's using a kind of scale that you're not used to hearing. But in that particular context, the scale does the job. But having learnt that scale, it's not something you're going to be able to use in loads of places, because it's just got such an unusual sound. You know, generally speaking, you will fall back on things that are based around the major, the minor, and the modes and the pentatonics and so on. So going back to the initial question of what kind of scale should you be learning, like I say, there's no definitive answer. Certainly major, natural, minor, you should know and understand the harmonies of them, how to split them into triads and chords, and understanding how they can be inverted into modes. It's good to know the minor pentatonic and the minor pentatonic flat 5, so say those as a minimum, and then build on that in whatever direction suits your musical style. So if the harmonic minor has the kind of sound that fits into your musical style, then learn the harmonic minor. If you're maybe more jazz oriented, you might want to go with a melodic minor. If you want to play fusion, you know, the melodic minor is very useful. It all depends on the type of music that you play, but say use a tool like PhatPhish to let you hear how the scales sound, and decide if it's something that you want to learn. But once you do learn a scale, don't just learn how to play it in one position. Find the scale anywhere on the neck, understand how the notes relate to each other. So because if you understand the scale, you know how to apply it properly in your own playing. So hopefully there's some food for thought there, a bit of inspiration for you to go away and investigate what scales there are in PhatPhish and see if there's something that you can add to your own scale vocabulary. So have fun, keep practicing, and I'll see you in another video sometime soon. Bye for now.